Every single morning, Claire wakes up with 165 pounds of dog draped across her chest, not curled beside her, not resting near her feet, directly on top of her. Otis has done this every single morning for almost 2 years now. His massive head rests against her collarbone, his breathing slows until it matches hers. And every morning, Claire lies completely still and lets him stay exactly where he is. Because she has learned something most people never understand about a dog his size. The bigger they are, the softer they love. Otis wasn't always like this. There was a time when nobody wanted him at all. But to understand how a 165-pound Mastiff ended up as the only thing standing between Claire and a life of empty rooms, we have to go back 3 years, to the shelter nobody thought he would leave. Claire Bennett was 29 years old, living alone in a small rented house outside Denver, Colorado. She worked long shifts at a physical therapy clinic and came home most nights to silence. Her last relationship had ended badly. Her family lived 2 states away. She told herself she was fine. She told herself a lot of things that year. One Saturday, a coworker convinced her to visit the county shelter just to look, just for something to do. That is where she saw him. A massive fawn-colored Mastiff with a black mask and heavy jowls folded into the back corner of his kennel like he was trying to disappear. The card on his cage read, Otis, 2 years old, surrendered, not good with strangers. A volunteer warned her before she even asked. He's been here 14 months, the woman said. People take one look at his size and keep walking, and when they don't walk away, he doesn't trust them anyway. Claire crouched down anyway. She didn't reach through the bars, she didn't call his name, she just sat on the concrete floor and waited. Otis lifted his enormous head and looked at her for a long, careful moment. Then he did something the volunteer said she had never seen him do. He stood up and walked to the front of the kennel. That was the beginning, but what happened over the next few months would surprise everyone who knew them both. The first week home, Otis refused to eat unless Claire sat on the kitchen floor beside his bowl. So she sat. The second week, he refused to sleep anywhere except pressed against her bedroom door, as if he were guarding the only entrance to something worth protecting. By the third week, he had stopped waiting at the door entirely. He simply climbed onto the bed and stayed. Claire hadn't slept through a full night in over a year, not since the breakup, not since the silence had moved into her house and made itself comfortable. But with 165 pounds of Otis pressed against her side, breathing slow and steady in the dark, the silence finally started to lift. She began talking to him the way people talk to someone who will never repeat a word. About her job, about her mother, about the apartment she almost didn't leave that Saturday. Otis never answered, of course. He just rested his heavy head on her lap and stayed. And Claire began to realize that was the entire point. If Otis and Claire's story is already pulling at something in you, this next part is exactly why it matters. Go ahead and hit subscribe before we keep going. Stories like theirs deserve to be seen. Because what Claire didn't know yet was how far Otis would go to protect her. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. Months passed. Otis settled into a routine built on instinct, not commands. He learned the sound of Claire's car in the driveway and was waiting at the window before she even parked. He learned that Sunday mornings meant the back porch, and he would lie across the doorway with the patience of something far older than 2 years. A dog that size tends to draw a second look on a quiet street. Some cross to the other side without quite realizing why. Claire stopped explaining him a long time ago. If someone was afraid, that was their choice, not his character. These are the kinds of stories that remind us some bonds choose us, not the other way around. Otis had been surrendered once already. The shelter records only said, not a good fit. Claire never asked him to be anything other than what he already was. And somewhere in that simple acceptance, something in Otis finally settled. He stopped flinching at raised voices on the television. He stopped watching the front door like it might open on someone he needed to fear. He started falling asleep. Completely. Real sleep. Deep, heavy, unguarded sleep. His enormous paws twitching through whatever dogs dream about when they finally feel safe. If you've ever watched a rescue animal finally rest for the first time, you know what it means. It means they've decided you're not leaving. And then, one night in late November, everything Claire believed about Otis was about to be tested. It was almost 11 at night. Claire was already in bed, Otis stretched out along her side, when she heard it. A sound from the backyard. Not wind, not a branch against the fence. Footsteps. Otis was on his feet before Claire even opened her eyes, a low growl rolling out of his chest, deeper than anything she had ever heard from him. He moved to the bedroom window and stood completely still, his massive body blocking the glow of the streetlight, his eyes locked on something in the dark. Claire reached for her phone with shaking hands. Through the blinds, she could see the shape of a man standing near her back fence. Not climbing it, just standing there, watching the house with a stillness that made her stomach drop. She dialed 911 and kept her voice as low as she could. Otis never barked. He simply stood between Claire and the window, a wall of muscle and quiet fury, and waited. The man must have seen Otis too, because seconds later, he turned and vanished into the dark. By the time the patrol car's headlights swept across the driveway, whoever it was had been gone for several minutes. The officer said 2 homes on her street had been broken into that same month. Hers was the only one on the block he never got close to. She already knew why. When the officer left, Claire sat down on the bedroom floor and pulled Otis into her arms. He let his full weight rest against her, finally exhaling, as if some job he'd held on to all night was finally done. What she felt in that moment would change how she saw him forever. Otis wasn't trained for that. Nobody taught him to stand at that window or to place his body between Claire and whatever was outside it. He simply decided that if anyone ever gave him a home again, he would spend every day keeping it safe. People who understand this kind of bond never watch just one story like it. Today, Otis is almost 4 years old. He still climbs onto Claire's bed every night, and she still lets him. He still waits at the window before her car turns into the driveway. And every morning, Claire wakes up underneath 165 pounds of dog who once had nobody and now has exactly one person he will never stop choosing. She thinks about that shelter volunteer sometimes, the one who warned her he wasn't good with strangers. She wants to go back and tell her that Otis was never the problem. He was simply waiting for someone worth staying for. Because some dogs don't choose the biggest house or the easiest life. They choose the person who sat down on a concrete floor and waited. Otis isn't the only big dog who's ever sensed danger before anyone else did. Just outside of Nashville, a 185-pound Doberman did something even more chilling at exactly 9:52 at night before a single monitor in the house ever sounded an alarm. If you want to see what happened next, that story is playing right now. Stay right where you are.